Today's lecture is on cannibalism and the Mycenaean saga. The reason that I have connected these two things is because cannibalism is actually one of the main themes of the Mycenaean saga. The Mycenaeans have to do with the house of Atreus. Now, we didn't make a specific study of the Iliad, but the chief warrior in the Iliad is, well, one of the chief warriors. Much of it is about Achilles, but Agamemnon is one of the chief warriors in the what they call the Achaean or Greek cause. Achaea was actually an area of Greece, but they referred to the collective group of city-states as Achaeans rather than, or Argives, rather than naming them by each individual city that they were from. But Mycenae was actually the center of civilization for the Greek world, probably around the time of what was believed to be the Trojan War. So I'm going to say, I think the Mycenaean Empire was at its high from about, I'll say, 1400 to about maybe 1200 BC. At that point, there was, all of the empires along the coast there collapsed for a variety of reasons, and it's hard to know what they are. However, mythologically, and we don't know whether any of this is true. Certain aspects of it most certainly are not historical. But the stories are very interesting, and this motif of cannibalism has a very definite psychological meaning. Now, I have turned back to Freud for this, but there's still definitely an element in the Jungian system that has to do with cannibalism as well, and the archetype of the father in particular. So let's start by looking at the Mycenaeans. Mycenae genealogy. Now, naturally, of course, these people are considered to have come from Zeus. Excuse me, I'm having my morning coffee. Okay, so Zeus is listed as he's sort of listed as the father of Tantalus here, and I don't know if that's entirely accurate. Tantalus and Zeus were very, very close. In fact, they were so close that he was actually privy to come to Mount Olympus and to dine with the gods, but he was immortal. So it's rather interesting, perhaps because there is no other progenitor listed for Tantalus, and perhaps in certain traditions, Zeus is the father of Tantalus. But he has a certain closeness with the gods, and we're going to tell his story in a few minutes. Oenomaus is also another sort of progenitor of this particular group. Now, where Oenomaus comes from is Tantalus has he has a son and a daughter. He has Niobe and he has Pelops. Okay, and Pelops is the one who figures into the cannibalism myth directly. And then he has his own story when he marries Hippodamia, and Oenomaus is her father. Okay, and Pelops and Hippodamia are the ones who give birth to Atreus and Thyestes. Okay, and as you notice, Erope is listed as belonging to both of them. So, and we'll tell that story as well. There's a story there of one person's spouse cheating on the other. Now we also see on the side we see we see Zeus, and we see that Zeus with and Tyndareus, who's the wife of Leda. Zeus actually ends up mating with Leda in the form of a swan, and she gives birth to the Discori, which we think of as the Gemini, Castor and Pollux. They're twins. Helen, as in the Helen that we think of as she's the queen of Sparta, but she is the one who was taken away to Troy and is considered to be the reason for the Trojan War. And then Clytemnestra. Clytemnestra is the wife of Atreus' son Agamemnon, and as I mentioned, Agamemnon was the chief warrior in that war. His brother is Menelaus, who marries Helen, and they have children. They have Hermione as their child, and she ends up being married to both Neoptolemus and Orestes, as you can see at the bottom. Thyestes has two sons who are not unnamed, but he has a daughter, Pelopia. But he also ends up sleeping with his daughter, and they bear a child, Aegisthus. And again, we'll talk about that story as well. Clytemnestra and Agamemnon have 4 children. They have Iphigenia, they have Electra, they have Chrysothemis, and then they have Orestes. And again, Iphigenia is the one who is supposedly sacrificed for fair winds at the beginning of the Trojan War. Clytemnestra gets angry at Agamemnon for this and kills him, and Orestes, with the help of Electra, is sort of set to avenge that death, and that becomes a tragedy known as the Oresteia, okay, which is post excuse me, way post Trojan War, and actually the Oresteia is the culmination of the problem of cannibalism, as a theme, at least in terms of the psychological meaning. What Orestes' act of having to kill his own father kill his mother to avenge his father, represents the kind of breakdown that cannibalistic, actions of within the family lead to. Okay, so let's talk about Pelops first. This is an image of him from a Greek Cratervase. He's the son of Tantalus, and as I mentioned, Tantalus is very close to the gods. But he he makes the decision. He knows everything. He knows the gods' secrets. Sometimes he tells the gods' secrets, which, as we will see, is actually a very bad thing to do. If the god tells you a secret and tells you must not share this, that will create big trouble for you. And many of now very few people in Greek mythology are punished in the underworld, but of those who are, they all have committed some kind of act against the gods, including the potential act of revealing their secrets. So, not a good idea to reveal the secrets of the gods. Tantalus, for some reason, decides he's going to test the Olympians, and he kills his son and cooks him up and serves him as a dinner to the Olympians. Now, all of them realize what's on their plates in front of them, and they won't eat it. The only one who will take a bite is Demeter. She actually takes a bite of what is actually his shoulder. But the rest of the gods will not eat this human flesh. And, Tantalus is then confined to Tartarus. He's one of the souls that's punished, and the way that he is punished is he is up to his neck in a pool of water. He's perpetually hungry and thirsty, and there's a beautiful fruit tree overhanging the water that he's in, but if he reaches for the fruit pulls away. And if he reaches down to drink the water recedes from him. So he can never ever slake his hunger and thirst for his rather brutal test of the gods. Now what ends up happening is Pelops is restored by the gods, and they give him an ivory shoulder to make up for the one that Demeter eats. Now there's some question as to why she does that. I don't know that I have a solid answer to that. There's a lot of different theories about why Demeter might have taken a piece of him. Of course, she is the Earth Mother. Maybe she's taking a piece back of what is hers. But there's I don't know that we know entirely the reason why she does that. Although I imagine an act like that is not insignificant. So Pelops is restored, and he becomes a suitor for Hippodamia. Now her father Oenomaus, the terms of marrying Hippodamia is that anybody who marries her has to win a chariot race, okay, against Oenomaus. And what he does, and of course nobody has won, and of course if you lose, he kills you. So it's a very dangerous game, marriage game. So what Pelops does is he bribes the charioteer of Oenomaus, Myrtilus, and or actually it's Myrtilius. No, I think I was right, Myrtilus. I'm just putting an extra I in there. Anyway, he becomes what happens is he bribes him to take the pin out of Oenomaus' chariot, so that while he's racing, his chariot will fall apart and his horses will drag him away and he'll be killed. And that's exactly what happens. But Myrtilus actually thinks after this that he's going, that as a prize that he's going to actually get to sleep with the bride. And Pelops says no way and pushes him off a cliff. And as he's falling to his death, he curses Pelops and he curses his family. Okay, so this is the first curse that actually occurs on the Mycenaean, the house. What will later be the house of Atreus. Okay, so this curse begins with Pelops. In a sense, I don't know that he ever actually promised Hippodamia to Myrtilus. I don't know whether that's considered to be. I don't believe that was something that was considered to be traditional, that you shared the bride around. I don't think that happens at all. but that sort of expectation there, and then Pelops responding to the man who helped him, through treachery, helped him win, he then destroys him. So, for this act, even if you might consider it maybe not justified, but somewhat, it wasn't done for no reason, but still, the sense of guilt is there. And so, after he's cursed by Myrtilus, this becomes, this continues the trouble for the family. It starts with Tantalus trying to serve his son to the gods. His son is restored, but now we still have, now there's a curse upon the family. Pelops is also a lover of Poseidon. As I've mentioned, many of the male gods take male lovers. You don't see female gods so much, except in perhaps, I'm not even sure on Lesbos if you see that, which is where we get the term lesbian from. That was the Isle of Sappho, and her erotic love poetry that seemed to be to Aphrodite. It was, and then of course there's the Amazon tribes, which we will talk about. The Amazons are sort of a one-breasted tribe of women. Actually, that's what Amazon means, by the way. It means one breast. So when you order from Amazon.com, you're actually ordering from onebreast.com. It's and the idea was that they hacked one of their breasts off to make it easier to hold their armor, and they would put their bow and arrow, or the sling for the quivers and the bow around there. They found that having the breast, it was in the way, so they would just hack it off, and they were warrior women. So I don't know. Point being, I don't know if there was any kinds of lesbianism that existed in that group. It's entirely possible, although most of them seem to be married to men, or at least admitted men long enough to make children and then kick them out. But Pelops was a lover. He apparently had made love to the god Poseidon. So that's another point of interest. So we have the curse by Myrtilus. The Peloponnesian, if you ever hear of that reference to that area of Greece, that's named after Pelops. So that's where you see his name enduring into modern times. And as I'd mentioned, Tantalus was condemned to suffer everlasting hunger and thirst in Tartarus for his crime, which is quite unspeakable. I mean, that's a very strange way to test somebody. But again, when you see something that's that strange, there's generally there's a metaphor going on here for something, and we will talk about what that is. Okay, so let's just move on with the genealogy here. Atreus is Pelops' son, and him and his brother Thyestes, they have a quarrel over who's going to be the king of Mycenae. Okay, they're both eligible after their father dies, basically they go to the oracle to say which one of them should be king, because as I have mentioned, the oracle was always consulted. This is standard practice in ancient Greece. Usually it was the oracle of Apollo, but there were other ones. There's the oracle at Dodona. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones off the top of my head. Those are the two main ones that I can think of, but I know that there are other oracles. The one at Apollo is the most common, in Delphi. And so they send an emissary there, and he says, whichever brother possesses a golden fleeced ram should be the king. So now the god Pan, who is Pan means all. Basically, he's part goat and part human looking. So he's what they call a satyr, S-A-T-Y-R, and that's kind of these hybrid goat or horse animals in humans. I think centaurs are actually half horse, and satyrs are half goat. But they're basically nature spirits. And Pan gives Atreus a golden fleeced ram. So Atreus, therefore, is considered to be king of Mycenae. But Thyestes ends up cheating Atreus. As I'd mentioned, the wife, Erope, had actually cheated with Thyestes, and she brought him, and she stole the ram, and she brought it to him. So this goes on for a while, but then the story is very, very strange, because there's still this disagreement about he ends up getting the ram. But then there's a point at which, the ram kind of goes back and forth between them. But there's a point at which they finally say, how did it put it? When the sun, that Atreus would become the king of Mycenae when the sun sets in the east. Now, as we know, the sun sets in the west. And Zeus, who felt it was proper that Atreus be the ruler, actually made the sun set in the east. And so, therefore, Atreus became king again. And Thyestes at this point was exiled because he had deceived Atreus and stolen the ram. So, Atreus regains his rightful kingdom. However, to get revenge on Thyestes, he takes his sons, he kills, cooks them. Okay, here we go back to cannibalism again. Gives Thyestes his own sons to eat. And when Thyestes realizes what Atreus has done, because Atreus invites him back, it seems to be a gesture of goodwill. But when he realizes what's happened, he also curses Atreus. So now we've got a curse from Myrtilus, and now we've got a curse from Thyestes on Atreus. Okay. Now, Atreus' son Agamemnon, after Atreus' death, he becomes king of Mycenae, and again, he's the one that we most famously know. Thyestes has Aegisthus. Now, he goes to an oracle, and the oracle tells him that he should sleep with his own daughter and bear a child who would avenge him. And so Aegisthus ends up being the child of incest. Okay, so now we've not only got cannibalism, we've got incest. Incest is a whole separate theme. I think this semester we're not going to get into incest in mythology. Some semesters I have time to cover it, but that's another whole family thing. And I'll talk a little bit about that in connection with cannibalism as themes having to do with the mother and father, the family archetypes. Okay, they're all related. Now, Agamemnon marries Clytemnestra, as I had mentioned, and to get to favorable winds at the start of the Trojan War, they're told that the goddess Artemis is angry and demands a human sacrifice, in order for them to get wins. So Odysseus, or Ulysses in the Roman, suggests to Agamemnon that they use his daughter Iphigenia. Now, why not Odysseus' son or somebody else? No, it has to be the daughter. So what they do is they tell Clytemnestra that she's going to be married to Achilles. So, of course, she's sent all dressed for a wedding, and then they put her down to be sacrificed. Now, different versions of this myth. There's something called the Cyprii, which is part of what they call Homerica. It's works that are sort of attributed to Homer, but are probably not by Homer. And the Cyprii is sort of another account of the Trojan War. It's very short. But one of the things that it says, very interestingly, because in some versions of this myth, just before Iphigenia is sacrificed, Artemis puts a deer in her place. So they sacrifice a deer instead of her. And in some versions, she's whisked away to become a priestess of Artemis, but in the Cyprii, she becomes the goddess Hecate. That's very interesting. Why would a human being suddenly become a goddess? And there's a tremendously long explanation as to why Iphigenia would be Hecate. That has to do with Artemis's relationship to rites of passage. Artemis was very deeply connected with girls going into puberty, and there was a sense that they had to perform certain rites so that Artemis didn't kill them before they, became women. Because remember, Artemis is a goddess of chastity. And she's also a very even though she's, considered this goddess of the hunt, and, but she's also got a very, very destructive aspect when it comes to children. And Artemis, so the idea is that Artemis would be angry that one would be leaving childhood and going into adulthood, and, there was sort of a, it was sort of like you had to do certain rites to appease Artemis, or you had to, do certain, there's one ritual where the girls of the town will act like bears. Bears are sacred to Artemis. Doing all of these different things they end up being kind of part of a rite of passage ritual. So Iphigenia, if she's murdered as a young girl, any young girl who doesn't make it into womanhood, it becomes a kind of a shade or a spirit, like a monstrous spirit, I think they call them. They have Gelo, and they have the Lamia, and they have different versions of basically ghost children that come and steal other children. And so Iphigenia, in a way, now Hecate is the goddess of the underworld, so in a way the idea of Iphigenia being snatched away, and that's another version, when young girls don't end up being married or reaching, puberty and going through all of the normal supposedly, rights of womanhood. Sometimes they become companions of the Furies, who are sort of embodiments of guilt and the establishment of law. They're the three monstrous women. So this idea of her becoming Hecate, she's being sacrificed before she's had a chance to become married and do all of those things. So in a way, she becomes sort of a representation of the, sort of a representation of the, this, when you follow the idea that she would then become sort of, swallowed up by the chthonic or by the other world, it kind of, you might see where it kind of makes sense. And also, it's believed that Hecate may have been an earlier version. She may have had certain roles in an earlier culture, because she's probably a very old goddess, and Artemis may have picked up some of those when the Olympians became the main gods of that area. Okay, so, on returning from Troy, Clytemnestra is angry about the sacrifice of Iphigenia, but she has been sleeping with Aegisthus, the son of a son of Thyestes and his daughter, but Clytemnestra is the one. In fact, that's where we get the idea of rolling out the red carpet. That's exactly what she does. Agamemnon comes home, she lays down rich red robes for him to walk on, she goes to give him a bath, and then, I'm trying to remember if she actually stabs him to death in the bath, or if she, pours acid in and kills him that way, or something like that into his bath that ends up killing him. In any case, he gets killed in the bath. And, so now that Agamemnon's dead, she tries to rule with Aegisthus. Aegisthus takes over the kingdom, but now Orestes, his son, has to come and avenge his death. But he's in a quandary, because the only way he can avenge his father's death is to kill his mother, and that's a big crime. Yeah, so we talk about Orestes. So Electra, it's interesting. There's 3 different plays about Electra, one by Sophocles, one by Euripides, and one by Aeschylus. And depending on which version you read, some of them Electra is very, very passive. Others, she's just sort of moderately encouraging her brother to kill her mother. And in others, she's an outright accomplice. So, different views of Electra. She has, what ends up happening in the end is that Orestes, because it's actually considered to be your duty in ancient Greece that if someone kills your father, then you have to avenge that death. So, by killing the killer, or by bringing the killer to justice. It's that idea of dike, D-I-K-E, justice has to be served. So, but the problem is, when you kill your own mother, then you're pursued by the Furies. And in this case, the Furies are sort of an embodiment of guilt. They appear in other places. They appear in Aeneid as instigators of war. But really, Heraclitus had often said that the Furies were those who set boundaries. In other words, if the sun was going to try to, go out of its orbit, the Furies would push it back. If Zeus tried to do something that wasn't proper, the Furies would push him back into doing what's right and just. Actually, in the Iliad, there's a point at which Achilles' horse speaks to him. Now, horses don't talk. So the Furies actually silence the horse because they say, because it is unnatural. You cannot transgress what is considered to be natural law. Okay, so the Furies are responsible for that as well. But but because he has killed his mother, now that's considered to be a grave crime against nature. So the Furies pursue him for that. So they're sort of embodiments of his conscience or his guilt in this particular case. And that would make sense, because if they're interested in law setting and maintaining boundaries, obviously when do you feel guilty? When you've broken a rule or a law. That you feel, I should not have done that, or I've transgressed against somebody. So Orestes is pursued, but then Athena feels sorry for him, so they have a court. Now this Athens, of course, becomes a very, very democratic city. So they have a court where there's, elders. I think there's 7 people on the jury, and Athena is sort of the extra vote. And actually, I'm sorry, there's 6 people on the jury, and Athena makes number 7. And so he pleads his case before the Areopagus in Athens, and Apollo stands up for him and says, hey, it's his duty to avenge his father's death. I mean, what else could he do? But the Furies say, well, you cannot kill your mother. That's criminal. So, so the jury's actually split, because really it is kind of a 50-50 thing. And half of them vote in his favor, half vote against him. So the jury's hung. So Athena gets to cast the deciding vote, and she casts in favor of Orestes. And the Furies are, well, furious, and hence where we get the term furious from. And they say, you don't honor us, and you don't respect the law. And Athena's trying to explain to them, no, we do respect you. You're very important. You're very good. So she starts referring to them as the Eumenides, the kindly ones. And in fact, the play by Euripides is called the Eumenides. And it's interesting because because Athena, because she's kind of like Odysseus. She's very clever. She's very good at talking. She's very good at being a diplomat. She very diplomatically tells them, oh no, it tells them you're going to have an honored place. They become known as the Semniathei, the great goddesses, or the beloved goddesses of the city, which is kind of weird when you see that these scary monsters from the deep are sort of being honored this way. But when you consider what, how important law and order is to Athens, you understand that aspect of the Furies is also important. And Athena wants them to be sure, yes, you have to, your role is important and we need you. So eventually they sort of acquiesce and say, well, okay. And one of the things they promise Athena is that they'll stop young girls from committing suicide before they become adults. Back to that whole theme of transition there, and actually kind of goes back to what we said about the liminal. And the danger of that point, that the Furies are another danger. So, and if the belief is that the young girls, end up, becoming, going with the Furies or becoming part of the Furies, then that's kind of an interesting reference there to that rite of passage. I don't know that the play actually references that aspect of the Semniathea, or that, but certain stories do. Okay. So that's a really short version. We could read the Oresteia, but it's quite long. It's 3 plays, and if I had a semester where that was more what I was focusing on, that's what I would do. But for now, the short version of the story will have to suffice. Now, so we talk about, again, this theme of cannibalism. Now Demeter, who is the Earth Mother, is the only one who actually eats of the shoulder of Pelops. So again, there's this idea, we've talked about the underworld, and we've talked about the role of the chthonic, which is, there's sort of been a tendency in the past to look at nature religions as sort of somehow peaceful, and they're really not. There's a lot of blood and gore and sacrifice, and it's considered to be very dangerous territory. For Jung, the underworld represents the unconscious, okay? But here, more importantly, we see a couple of different meanings to cannibalism. Now, the Freudian view is the one that I'm referring to here, the acquiring of power through eating of the flesh. One of your readings for this week was from Totem and Taboo by Sigmund Freud. And I do want to read a little piece of that to you. I have my copy here. Just to kind of get a sense of what he's referring to, something about called the totem sacrifice. Now, he's not referring to cannibalism per se. What he's referring to is when you have a tribe that has a totem animal, and that the totem animal may be ritually killed and eaten by the tribe. Okay? And he actually likens the idea of the sacrificial victim, which embodies the power, or is the center of the tribe, that eating it actually is a sharing of power. Okay? In fact, that's what a lot of people believe that the Eucharist is. Because you have a sacrifice. I mean, and it's not, there's nothing sacrilegious about saying that, because certainly when the priest stands up there and does that, he says, this is my body which is given for you. This cup is my blood which is given for you. I mean, the Eucharist has a very cannibalistic theme, but we don't tend to, if you've been raised Catholic, you don't tend to think of it that way. But this is why early Christians were accused of being cannibals, because that's what they would say. Well, they eat flesh and they drink blood. And, in a way they do, because if you believe in transubstantiation, which is the process of the Eucharist, the bread becoming the body of Christ, or the wine becoming the blood of Christ, then you believe that it has lived. The transubstantiation literally means that it has, crossed over. It's changed substances. It's now that's what you're actually eating, even though it tastes like bread and wine. So it's but it's a way, and the whole point of taking that is that you become, now you have Christ within you through the Eucharist, and so that might help if understand why you would, again, back to the totem animal, the idea that you would eat the totem animal and that you would be imbued with the power of the clan or the tribe, through the animal, which has given itself up for you. Okay. So let's look at, I've got page 189 in Freud, and it says, he goes to the second paragraph under where it says 6. Robertson Smith has shown us that the old totem feast returns in the original form of sacrifice. The meaning of the rite is the same: sanctification through participation in common meal. The sense of guilt, which can only be allayed through the solidarity of all the participants, has also been retained. In addition to this, is the tribal deity whose supposed presence at the sacrifice, in whose supposed presence the sacrifice takes place, who takes part in the meal like a member of the tribe, and with whom identification is effected by the act of eating the sacrifice. How does the god come into this situation which was originally foreign to him? Okay, so Freud is talking about, now he's also talking about the guilt of killing. Certainly in a tribal sense, you have to kill, as I've mentioned, you have to kill to live. Life requires death, and that's a great paradox, and there's a tremendous amount of guilt at having to kill another living creature. So certainly in those societies, they showed great reverence for the animal because the animal was allowing them to live. By offering itself, now you can live. Okay, so that's sort of the ultimate meaning there, but there's a guilt that's involved, so that somehow, because through this kind of sacrifice, one is alleviated of the guilt. So let's see, page 190, if I go towards the last paragraph. We know there are a number of relations of the god to the holy animal, the totem, and the sacrificial animal. 1, usually one animal is sacred to every god, sometimes several animals. 2, in certain, especially holy sacrifices, the so-called mystical sacrifices, the very animal which has been sanctified through the god was sacrificed to him. 3, the god was often revered in the form of an animal, or from another point of view, animals enjoyed a godlike reverence after a long period of long after the period of totemism. 4, in myths, the god is frequently transformed into an animal, often to the animal that is sacred to him. From this assumption, the assumption was obvious that the god himself was the animal, and that he had evolved from the totem at a later stage of religious feeling. But a reflection that the totem itself is nothing but a substitute for the father relieves us of all further discussion. Okay, now, here's where Freud does not believe in archetype theory, okay? But now he's getting to the point that the animal or the sacrifice, if you've ever heard the term scapegoat, okay? Scapegoat refers to the fact that in ancient Judaism, a goat would be sacrificed. What they would do is symbolically all the sins of the tribe would be put into that goat, and then the goat would be sacrificed. Ancient Greece does have similar rituals where you have animals that are end up taking on all of the transgressions of the community, and then the animal's slaughtered. Okay, so now if you look at the father as sort of an archetype, if we look at Zeus as the father, okay, he's the king of the gods, right? And this idea, and of course, as we saw, Cronus tried to swallow him. It's basically this idea that the father figure, that this sort of king father figure, becomes sort of the bearer of guilt. Okay, there becomes someone who's a bearer of guilt, but that by sort of placing the sins there, the rest of the family is sanctified. Now, in these kinds of acts of cannibalism, though, we kind of have the reverse thing that's going on. So it can be something as an acquiring of power. It's either an acquiring of power or an expiation of guilt. Okay, it helps relieve your guilt. You are your sins. Your sins are forgiven through the sacrifice, and that actually is the whole doctrine of the incarnation in Christianity. Your sins are forgiven through a sacrifice. It's the same idea, only instead of using an animal, you're using an individual who's supposed to be the Son of God. Okay. Now, there is another aspect to cannibalism here that I want to talk about, but here I say, what cannibalistic ritual do people in our society perform annually? You perform a symbolic cannibalistic ritual probably every year if you celebrate your birthday, because the birthday cake is actually a stand-in, wherein when people eat the cake, they're participating in the fact that you have lived another year. They're participating. It goes back to a similar kind of a ritual. Now, we don't think about that. It's just, hey, it's cake, it's good, and we eat it. But It's just something you do. But if you wonder where some of these traditions come from, there's actually sort of a cannibalistic taint to that instead of eating you on your birthday, because you've lived this long, the cake is your stand-in, and so that way people can participate in the fact that in your life as well. Now let's see what else I have on here. Yeah. So I have Freud here on cannibalism. Sacrificial animal is a substitute for the father, what Jung would call the archetypal father. Now Freud would go a step farther, and he will refer to the Oedipus complex. Okay, and that's also, I think he does refer to that in here. Let me see if I can find it. Let's see, I've got the Christianity one, and we've talked about that. Okay. I'm just trying to see if I can find it in the section that I gave you. It should be in here. I want to see his reference to the Oedipus complex. What I might have to do is I might have to turn to auto rank for that. In any case, what the idea is that, because remember Freud talks about the Oedipus complex. The Oedipus, who we'll talk about in the Theban Saga, is, and actually that's the one that I usually address when it comes to incest. It's the Oedipus myth, because he sleeps with his own mother. It's, the idea is that, now Oedipus, what he does is he receives an oracle that he will kill his father and marry his mother. Now Oedipus doesn't want to do this. He ends up being steered in that direction as much as he tries to avoid it. Now, but Freud uses the term, he says this kind of they talk about sort of a fantasy desire to kill the parent, who's also the god figure. Now when we talk about hero mythology, Otto Rank goes into his explanation of that with relationship to the archetype of the divine child. Okay. There's the parent. Your parents are sort of like your god figures when you're young, and the attachment that now he's referring to male children and their attachment to the mother, and the father sort of stands in the way of that relationship, and there's a fear. Okay, now this is kind of an unconscious thing that plays out. It doesn't mean that I don't know anybody who wants to kill their father and marry their mother. I'm sure you don't either, but it's just but symbolically. It's associated with themes of abandonment, of a child feeling like it has to have a certain level of importance to its family, okay? And there's a certain amount of unconscious guilt about, that attitude towards the father. So, he would say was that these sort of totemistic rituals were a means of assuaging that guilt by putting it onto a totem animal. Now, he believed there was a real primal sacrifice that we have a memory of. I doubt that highly. Most of these things just seem to arise out of just the conditions of being alive and the kind of dynamics that can go on as one fights to get towards adulthood. But that's really the critical point here. What cannibalism does is it subverts the system. You may have this sort of complex that's unconscious in children. And by the way, in girls, it's called the Electra complex, after Oreste's sister Electra, because she loved her father and hated her mother, and wanted her mother killed. So that's how Jung is the one who came up with the term Electra complex. What's going on here in the cannibalistic theme, and this is very important, what's happening is that you have the father figure, the father archetype, okay? Now we've got it's feared. You have a son who may want to challenge the father or kill the father. We'll see this in hero myths as well. There's a sense of wanting to challenge. And what this is that the father basically putting the kibosh on the whole system. And what this tends to do is it subverts the expansion of the family. Incest is considered to be a crime because it keeps everything in the family, as they say. If you look at the royals who would only sleep with people within, and then the kinds of genetic mutations that came out of that. Biologically, it's not a good thing to do. And there may be something. The biology could be driving the mythology. I mean, you don't know. Unconsciously, Jung felt certainly that there was a connection between our genetics and our instincts and our impulses and the way that mythologies arise. so the idea is that the father, by devouring the son, he takes, this is something, this is the child, this is an expansion of the family, an expansion of the influence of the father, but instead of allowing the family to grow, the father tries to devour the son and take the power back. Okay? That's another way to look at cannibalism, and that's the way it looks at here. And what you see here in the Oresteia is the total destruction of the family. Orestes is eventually, through Athena's help and through Apollo's help, is able to be released from that guilt. But it's utterly destroyed his family. It's completely destroyed the house of Atreus. Okay, everybody's been killed. And all it does is lead to a complete disintegration of the family. And the whole point, incest is bad because if you keep everything in the family, even if you're talking about psychological incest as opposed to physical incest, because again, most people aren't looking to commit incest, but it destroys the family because there's no expansion outward. You're not sharing your DNA very widely, or you're just not even developing yourself as a human being. It doesn't have to be like you marry other people and join other families and make families bigger or extended. It doesn't have to be so literal or biological. It can be that you have children who go out and do great things. They could write great things or be great musicians. Great something that's of lasting value that people, that is contribution which reflects back on the family. We love to do genealogy and say, oh, this person was the son of this person who did this great thing. It's an expansion of the family, and it becomes a glorification of the family. It makes the family become immortal. Things like cannibalism and incest, what you're doing is you're cutting the family off. The mother and the father archetype subverts the process. Or the mother or the father archetype, can subvert the process. And in most of these mythologies, it's the father, by trying to devour the son. And and again, it's related back to this Oedipus complex that where the son has to challenge the father in some fashion. Okay, so in the Mycenaean saga, what we're seeing is that guilt is passed down through the generations. It's the result of violating a taboo. Husband murders the wife. Orestes matricide. Okay, this has completely destroyed the family. And Orestes is put into this catch-22, to use the term from that book. He's pursued by the Furies. Who, and again, the Furies would be opposed to this whole process as well because it does subvert what is considered to be the normal developmental order of how human society grows and spreads, how life is continued, how families are continued. Okay, especially in an era where the oikos was more important than the polis. At this point, the polis becomes center. Now, oikos is the word for household, and certainly in the archaic period, in the period that Agamemnon would have, if he lived, would have lived. Agamemnon, he would have been from more of a tribal society where the household would have been of primary importance. So a lot of these come out of an archaic period. The polis is the city-state. So then when you start having these cities where your allegiance to the city and its rights and its welfare and its well-being becomes more important than the family, that's when you start seeing this development of individualism. Okay, but so there's sort of a sociological component to it as well. But yeah, so the destruction of the family, especially in that period, is a very, very serious thing. Now, the chaos, again, of this is set right by Athena, and the rule of law, this is the way that, in a way, this is the way the polis's answer to the problem. We have law and order and justice, and this is how we sort things out as a community and set things right. It's not just the mother and the father. So this, in a way, is a mythology of the polis, trying to say how the polis trumps the family. The family can disintegrate, but the polis is the one that can set things right. Okay, that's it for this particular lecture. We will have probably some discussion on this in class, and I'll see you next time.